Hello, everyone. Sorry we're 15 minutes late. Technical difficulties. That's what happens when you do a live show. I am Scott Menzel, and welcome to Whatcha Watching Wednesdays right here on the Hollywood Critics Association YouTube channel, Facebook page, and Twitter feed. Thank you so much for joining this wonderful episode. We have 4 people, including myself, on this week's episode, and we will bring them in one by one, starting with Mr. Aaron Neuwirth.
Hey, how you doing, Scott?
Good. How you doing, Aaron?
Great.
All right. So tell everyone where they can find you.
Okay. Well, I write movie reviews over at WeLiveEntertainment.com, and I cover Blu-ray reviews at whysoblue.com, and I write about Godzilla wherever anyone will let me. And I'm also on Twitter at Aaron's PS4. Plus, I host a podcast of my own with my friend Abe. It's called Out Now with Aaron and Abe. We talk about weekly movie releases, which is certainly awesome during a time like this, but we found ways to be very creative with that. And so it's been a lot of fun. We've had a lot of cool episodes focused on a lot of streaming releases, as well as other fun topics and things. And we do commentary tracks and stuff like that. So yeah, podcasts, reviews, all that stuff.
Awesome. All right. And then we have Mr. David Bax.
Thanks for having me. I write movie reviews and other stuff at battleshippretension.com. That's also where I podcast 2 times a week, 3 times if you're lucky enough to be a patron. And you can find me on Twitter at DavyPretension.
Awesome. And then finally, Mr. Box Office himself, Scott Mendelson.
Hi. It's been a challenging couple of months for Mr. Box Office. There's no box office. And VOD ranking charts just aren't very exciting.
No.
He makes his kids call him Mr. Box Office, too, which is a real shame.
That's funny. Like my kids ever listen to me about it. I can be found at Forbes, Forbes.com. Google the ticket booth, Scott Mendelson, Forbes. Yeah.
All right, awesome. All right, so we'll start off with you, Mr. Box Office himself. So there is a movie that's doing fairly well at the limited box office, and you want to talk a little bit about that. So give us a little bit of a breakdown and tell us your thoughts.
Well, there is a film called The Wretched, which opened currently in VOD in May. It's an IFC midnight picture, directed by Brett Pierce and Drew Pierce, and by default, it's been the top movie of the quote-unquote box office over the last 3 weekends. It's made a whopping almost $600,000 so far. The rate is great. It could be the first movie to make $1 million since The Hunt, I guess, by default. So, in the interest of curiosity, I watched it. I paid $6 for the privilege, since I don't live near any drive-ins, and it's enjoyable. The best way I can describe it is it's basically, if Disturbia is Steven Spielberg's Rear Window, metaphorically speaking, it was a DreamWorks production, but I don't know how hands-on Spielberg was. Then this is sort of J.J. Abrams' Steven Spielberg's Rear Window, in that it feels a bit like a homage to the 1970s, 1980s coming of age, struggling with divorce, summer romance, and oh wait, supernatural stuff too type movie. It is its own thing. It's not necessarily what I would consider a spot the reference type picture, and that's a good thing. It does its own thing. It's a slight film, but it looks very nice. It runs about 95 minutes. Looks to be shot in scope. And it concerns a young man that goes to live with his dad in the middle of a contentious divorce and discovers something sinister possibly going on next door.
Do you think when he talks to people about this, he's like, yeah, my parents are going through a pretty contentious divorce right now, so that's why I'm looking at it.
Possibly. The film, it works as a lazy Saturday night rental. Which, yes, by default, it's probably going to be the Well, if it's number one at the box office this weekend, it will be the first film to do it for 4 weekends in a row since, I believe, Black Panther. If it does it for 5 weekends in a row, it will be only the fourth movie to do it in 20 years, behind Sixth Sense, Avatar, and Black Panther. Beyond 5 weeks, who knows? I mean, there are several movies concurrent that have done 6 weekends or more consecutively, all the way up to Titanic at 15 weekends. I mean, assuming it stays in the drive-ins and people keep showing up, yes, it could make some kind of skewed box office history. Having said that, what stood out most about the picture, other than the fact that it's entertaining, it's enjoyable. I like the setup more than the payoff, but that's just because it does a good job sketching its characters. Is that it's very much the kind of film that, pardon the cliche, in the old days would have been a normal studio programmer. And if it had come out in 1983 or maybe even 1985 was one of the first PG-13 movies, it would probably have a slight cult following among people that were 8 to 12 years old when they first saw it.
Okay.
Is it a new horror classic? No. Is it good enough to justify its weird, skewed place in the movie trivia annals? Sure, why not?
Now, Aaron, I know you saw it. What do you think?
I agree with Scott. Like, it does what it sets out to do fairly effectively. It's nothing over the top amazing, but it's good. It's a fun movie. What I like is that it takes a setup that I don't see enough in movies. It's Fright Night. Like, it's doing Fright Night as far as like there's something next door going on and I don't know about it. And yes, Rear Window and Disturbia come to mind. But like, I like the idea of like nobody knows what else is going on except I do. There's something creepy with this, and instead of a vampire, it's a witch. And that's fun. And I can see why it would work for a drive-in audience. It's obviously beyond the fact that it's the only way to see it in some kind of screen, but it's horror. So horror will work that way. But it does it does, like you mentioned, Scott, it has a balance of like, it has humor as well as being, mildly scary, and it's got some good, looking effects stuff or what have you. So like, it works for like a drive-in kind of crowd. I can see why it's so popular, as limited as that may be. And I also look forward to all of the asterisks that Scott will have to put on every one of his posts once he has to write about records and stuff at his box office post in a year from now.
David, did you see it?
I did not. I'm sorry.
I did not either, so don't feel bad.
I just watched it today, so I'd have something new to talk about.
Oh, that's great. No, I'm glad you chimed in on this, because I know this movie has been making a lot of headlines, whatever makes headlines nowadays. That isn't an animated family film released by a major studio. All right, so let's go to you, David. What's your first pick?
Well, speaking of B movies that you can catch at a drive-in, I wanted to talk about Andrew Patterson's directorial debut, The Vast of Night, which you can also see this weekend if you're a Prime subscriber. It's available on Amazon Prime starting Friday, and this is on the one hand, it seems superficially to be a very, very, very modest movie. It takes place in the late 50s in a fictional New Mexico town, where you've got the dude who is the late night DJ on this tiny FM station, and you've got his friend, high school girl who runs the switchboard in town, and she starts hearing weird noises over the phone lines, and he puts them out on the radio to see if anyone has any insight as to what they might be, and that sort of leads them into this alien invasion visitor from outer space type of conspiracy theory. It's cool. It's a cool little sci-fi thing. It's surprisingly spooky. It actually, by the time it goes on, seems like a perfect sort of late night drive-in or cuddle on the couch with your sweetie type of old-fashioned creepy horror movie. But what really stands out is just I think that this movie is bound to go down as one of those movies that seems to just come out of nowhere and announce a new talent, something from like Pi or Primer or Following, I guess. just like, where did this person come from? How is this movie clearly such a modest, beyond modest, very, very small budget, and yet Andrew Patterson's filmmaking talent is so powerful, so well realized from nothing. This to come out of nowhere and make a movie this strong. It's undeniable. What he does with this budget, with these locations he shot it in a couple of small Texas towns that are so perfectly art directed and shot as to almost seem like they're expansive movie sets, like something Orson Welles would have built in the 40s. It also has there's a lot of talent with the camera. The opening sequence reminded me of all things, the opening of Brian De Palma's Snake Eyes, which
yeah, all right.
Snake Eyes, it's at least edited to look like an continuous take. The opening of Vast of Night isn't edited as a single take, but it has that same feel of the radio DJ guy is showing up at the high school where there's going to be a basketball game because he's got to set up the recording equipment to broadcast the game the next day, and then he's also like interacting with the band, and meanwhile everyone's setting up. There's an electrical problem, the basketball team is warming up, and the camera is just sort of like following this guy all through this much more modest version of the whatever it was supposed to be, the MGM Grand or whatever in Snake Eyes, but with every bit as much control over the film and its aesthetics. The sound design is amazing. As a veteran like Brian De Palma shows in Snake Eyes, I honestly I'm really blown away by The Vast of Night. I mentioned a couple other first time directors earlier. I would say the more recent one, from a more art house point of view, is Patrick Wang, who a couple of years ago made a Bread Factory Parts 1 and 2 and got a lot of notoriety for that, especially from the Independent Spirit Awards and stuff like that. His directorial debut back in 2011, In the Family, was, and that's a very different movie. That's a 3-hour grief and family drama. This is under 90-minute, little sci-fi sort of Twilight Zone, Outer Limit type of riff. But that was the last time I remember being this overwhelmed and blown away and impressed by a first-time film from someone I'd never even heard of.
That's awesome. You're the second person who has raved about this. I believe Kevin Taff also in our group really loved this movie and recommended it. Did anyone else see it? I
have seen it. I'm not going to go too far into it because David's actually going to be guesting on our podcast on Sunday to talk about it even more. But I will say that, man, Snake Eyes is not a good movie, but it does have a good opening. Like I do recall that. Talking about Snake Eyes for a long time, it's the first time in a while. I'm sure that makes everybody pretty happy. I remember seeing the trailer for it a lot for some reason. Like, really wanted to sell that Snake Eyes. But no, The Vast of Night. Yeah, I mean, yes, I will say I would recommend this film as well, just to keep it brief on that. But it would fit for like a drive-in setting also. Like that'd be a good one to like see in that capacity.
Yeah,
I think it has been playing at some drive-ins.
What'd you say, Scott?
I believe it has been playing at some drive-ins for the last month.
I think it's just like the last 2 weekends. I think.
Yes. Yeah, it opened on the 15th in select theaters.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching this, and I'm glad that just a side note, I'm glad the drive-ins are actually starting to have a comeback. I just wish that there was more of them in California, and they weren't like an hour and a half away, because Mendelson is like my neighbor in a weird way. Like he's probably a mile away from me, and like it would take us easily like 90 minutes to get to the first drive-in. So we ain't going anytime soon. All right, Aaron, how about your first pick?
My first pick here is The Trip to Greece, the fourth and final installment in the Trip series. I have been a fan of the Trip series for the past 10 years since it started with Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon. It's funny that we have so many, delays and pushes of movies this year as far as big franchise films go. Like last week, Fast and Furious, F9: the Fast Saga would have come out, but I still was able to see one of my favorite ongoing franchises, the latest entry there. So thanks for IFC and their VOD. abilities there. But no, I was a big fan of the trip to Greece in the same way that I liked all the other films. I haven't really decided on a ranking as of yet, but I certainly think it works in a lot of the same ways that the other ones do. For those that aren't aware, the trip started in 2010. It has Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon. People may know Steve Coogan more than Rob Brydon, but they're big in England. The concept is that they go out on a trip to various restaurants for several days, and the setup, but they're playing like loose versions of themselves. The setup requires them to go to these nice restaurants, and you see like my director Michael Winterbottom make sure to like show you the food and everything and the preparation, and then it gets to them, and they're largely having conversations with each other. They're slightly antagonistic towards each other, but they're foils to each other, and so they have a lot of fun for the audience in kind of bickering with each other as well as trying to outdo each other with impressions. And the impressions is obviously a big factor in it. There's a whole Michael Caine thing that started in the first one and is carried on for at least a couple of the other ones. And so you're watching these two have these dinners, go to these like various locations. In the first one's the English countryside. The second one's a trip to Italy, so they're going to Italy and going around there. The third one's a trip to Spain. And so it's all the same basic setup. And now you're at the trip to Greece, which I watched a couple weeks ago now with my lovely girlfriend, and it was just a good time. But what it does well is, in addition to being generally, quite funny or humorous, it also has this, a melancholy bent, because they're middle-aged men, and that's been a recurring theme throughout the series of trip films, is that they're dealing with getting older and what it means to them as far as how it affects their careers, how it affects their personal lives, what it means for their wives, their children. And you get to see a lot of how their egos work with each other, especially Steve Coogan, which again, they're playing loose exaggerations of themselves. So I always wonder how far that goes as far as their own personal lives and how people regard them because of the popularity of these trip films, popular as they can be. But with this one, it digs into the kind of, like, because it's the fourth and final trip movie. I keep saying that because it's on the poster, the fourth and final. The final course, I believe, is like one of the taglines. But it finds a way to kind of reach some sort of closure. That said, and this is something that I always find interesting about them, each movie is here in America. In Britain, like, there's 6 episodes of a series, and then they just edit it all together to make one narrative film, and that's been done each time around. And I would say this is the first time that I actually felt like I would have liked to have seen the episodes of the trip to Greece, just to get a better sense of some of the contextual things happening involving the versions of the characters they're playing, as far as what Steve Coogan's going through and what Rob Brydon's going through. I feel like I could have got filled in more on what it is that they're going through in a deeper meaning beyond getting some highlights. That said, it's still effective. I still think it does what it's trying to do quite well. I like that you can kind of see the narrative through line as far as who these characters have been and who they've come to be. They're the same people, but you see the growth of it. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of the series. I like what the trip to Greece did. It's fun. It's a good time.
Awesome. I did not see this last one yet, but I am a fan of the other 3 as well. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing this. I think there's just something very natural and organic about these movies, just for the simple fact that it's like watching 2 friends hanging out for a couple of hours, and like they're going out to dinner and they're like basically there to amuse and entertain themselves, and the cameras just happen to be rolling. There's something very like indie about these movies, but also kind of natural and rewarding about them as well. I'm a big fan of them too, and I'm looking forward to watching the final one. But whenever they do like a final one, I always hold off, because I'm kind of like, I'm going to miss these too much, because I do really like the 2 of them together. Yeah,
no, I mean, I would like to see more of this if they ever did it, but if they're going to close it off, well, that is what it is. I will say, it is like, they are funny, and I didn't emphasize like the impressions they do enough. They leave the Michael Caine thing out, but they bring in like some Roger Moore Bond again, but they bring out just some other really funny things. But the best is, like, because they're so trying to outdo each other with how good some of the impressions can be, it is always funny that especially with Coogan, to see him break at Bryden, to see him like actually give in to the fact that Bryden's making him laugh. Like there's something very satisfying about that, which speaks to what you're saying, Scott, about the kind of naturalism, the authenticity of two guys that don't seem to want to admit it, but are friends with each other and like have a good time doing this.
Right. David, did you see this one? Scott, did you see this one?
No. Not yet. I'm very slowly making my way through the series. I didn't realize that, or I didn't remember. I'd actually seen the first one when it first came out, which I realized about 5 minutes into after renting is like, okay, I'm gonna watch it again, and I didn't remember that much. But my thought was, knowing that there are 3 more, I was like, wow, this first one is really melancholy. I'm curious how this continues. It gets dark, theoretically darker and darker and more, introspective, blah blah blah. And of course, there's a scene toward the end of the first one. It's like, I'm so old. I'm 44. Like I turned 40. Up yours. Thanks. But no, eventually it's on my slow to-do list.
Yeah, I understand. How about you, David?
No, I haven't seen it. I'm sorry.
Okay. No. Okay.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
You apologize. Why were you a fan of the other ones too, or no?
What was that?
David, were you a fan of the previous 3? Did we actually lose him this time? Seems like it.
He's taking a trip out of this call.
I suspect foul.
Exactly. Now, David, what were you saying?
No, never mind.
I was just apologizing for not having seen any of the movies, and then you guys all froze up for a while.
Oh, we couldn't hear you. Yeah, okay. So you haven't seen it. Is your answer to that question?
Right. Sorry.
The joys of Wi-Fi connections.
Yeah.
All right. Well, David, we're going to go back to you.
Okay.
Talk about your second pick.
Well, that's actually a perfect transition because speaking of miniseries that are cut down into movies, Raul Ruiz's 2010 Portuguese miniseries Mysteries of Lisbon was actually released in 2011 as a cut down but still very long feature film here in the U.S. But until now, it has its full 6-hour miniseries version has never been available legally in the U.S. to see. But now you can see it as a part of Film at Lincoln Center's virtual cinema, which is these virtual cinemas are a great way to rent movies, and part of the proceeds go to art house or independent theaters, try to keep them, hopefully keep them afloat. But so Mysteries of Lisbon is based on it takes place in the mid 19th century in Portugal and France, and it's based on a novel that was written and published at that time, and it's it's the kind of thing that the word sprawling, we critics like to use the word sprawling, and that's exactly what the kind of narrative that Mysteries of Lisbon is. It starts out being about an orphan boy who gets sick, and a rich woman comes to visit him at his bedside, and then the priest at the orphanage tells him, I have to tell you, that was your mother. That was your real mother. Your mother is a rich aristocrat. And he tells the boy the story, and then that leads to another story and another story. By the third episode, we're getting stories of like some, it's like three people removed. It's some nun that the boy's mother knew at a convent, and we get her whole backstory. And so each episode is sort of broken down into these different very character focused stories that all in some ways connect to that priest from the orphanage, and by the end it sort of comes full circle and we rejoin the sick orphan boy from the beginning. Now he's a man, he's a poet, he's traveling the world, and we get another story with him. But it seems better suited in that it's made up of 6+ sort of short stories. It seems better suited to the miniseries format than to the feature film format, which I have to admit I didn't see at the time. But it's also just it's just so easy to get lost in. Visually, I would describe it as sumptuous. The camera, it has all these very long takes. That seems to be a theme of what I'm talking about, but not the Brian De Palma Steadicam type long tapes. These are like old-fashioned, sort of like almost old Hollywood, like the camera moves on like cranes and gimbals and dollies, and so it sits still for a while, and we just get two two people, or three people talking in these beautifully composed frames, and then like a stage play, they move to a different sort of part of the room, and the camera moves with them, and suddenly we have this whole setup. And the way that for 6 hours, Raul Ruiz, who died shortly, this was he only made one more film after this. In his lifetime, more stuff has come out since then, but he died shortly after completing this movie and another one. The way that he has such control over this lavish production, and he sustains that for 6 hours without it being, growing tedious in the way of so many like sort of period, costume drama, historical type things. This movie is this miniseries is full of life and full of beauty, and the fact that it's about 6 different stories and they're all being told in some way or another by this priest. The miniseries is maybe above all just a celebration of the act of storytelling. It seems to just delight in the idea that every person you meet on the road or in a convent or wherever has some great story to tell and deserves to be told with the same flourish as and beauty as anyone else's story. So I would definitely recommend, like I mentioned, Film at Lincoln Center is how you can check it out. For now, I think in a couple of weeks it'll be available on more virtual cinemas that you can support. But definitely, it's the first time in 10 years that Americans have had the chance to check out the full unadulterated mysteries of Lisbon, and I highly recommend it.
Great. All right, I realized that I didn't even actually give my first pick, so let me jump in here real quick, and I'll talk really quick. It is a movie that is coming out on VOD this week. It is The High Note, and this is a film that I'm going to be honest, as I said in my review, I was not really expecting too much out of, because the trailer looked rather generic to me. But I wound up really, really liking it. Story's very, very simple. It's about a woman named Grace Davis, played by Tracy Ellis Ross, and she is a famous musician. She has been on tours. She's a very big deal, and she's kind of getting to that point in her career where she doesn't really know what she wants to do next. Her manager, played by Ice Cube, really wants to put her in Vegas, let her do her thing there. But her assistant, Maggie, played by Dakota Johnson, has different plans. She wants to produce one of her albums, but she's afraid to ask. It's a really sweet, nice, feel-good movie. It doesn't reinvent the wheel in any way, shape, or form, but it's just like a studio movie that they used to make. Again, kind of quoting Mendelson on this, like I felt like in like the 90s, where it was just like a character-driven film where it's really about like 3 main characters. They all have story arcs, and we all get to know them, and we get to care about them and see why they feel certain ways. And the chemistry between all 3 of them really works. The love of music really adds to the movie. LA as a backdrop also works. I just fell in love with this movie because it was just something that I needed in terms of entertainment and lightheartedness. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't deep. It was just a movie about dreams and believing in yourself. And I'm a sucker for those movies. I'll just come out and say it. I know some of you guys have seen this. Mendelson, Troy, give your 2 cents.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was in a skewed way, it's kind of ironic that it ended up going to VOD instead of theaters. It was supposed to come out in theaters in early May. In that, and I should have looked this up, I want to help me, the name of the director, I don't want to mispronounce her name.
Misha Ganatra.
Thank you. This feels in a skewed way like a direct-to-DVD version of her last film, Late Night, with Emma Thompson and Mindy Kaling. In the same way that, for example, Kareem and Coffee, which was a Netflix picture, felt like a direct-to-video variation of that filmmaker's last film, Stuber, which played in theaters last summer. That's not necessarily an artistic criticism. It's not. I enjoyed the High Note, but it's a smaller in terms of scale, in terms of number of characters, in terms of it's a much more grounded picture. What I think works best about it is how I'm not going to say it's raw because that's not accurate, but it's relatively honest in terms of how
Yes.
the whole believe in yourself, you can do anything, whatever philosophy is A, somewhat naive, and B, can sometimes do more harm than good. No details, but Ice Cube has a wonderful monologue toward the end of the first act where he just really lays into a certain character about why their philosophy is at best full of holes. I did enjoy the relationship between Johnson and Kelvin Harrison. Yes. As an up-and-coming singer who she sort of sees the potential first client, so to speak. There are contrivances, there are coincidences. And I think it's from a marketing perspective, I'm amused that the film was sold with a plot that comparatively is almost a B plot with her and the would-be diva,
Yeah, I agree.
And that's not a criticism. It's just sometimes how marketing works.
It's mismarketing. Yeah. No.
As a movie, I think it's fine. It's very slight, intentionally so, but it's well written, it's well acted, and it's worth your. If you're going to see it in theaters in the first place, it's worth your $20 to rent it.
I agree.
I can agree. You mentioned Late Night, your previous film, and actually, I think this is a better movie than Late Night. And I think I think you're overplaying the scale of Late Night because I think they're about on the same level. I mean, Late Night takes place in like a few offices and apartments. I mean, it was a product Sundance. Like, it's not a big movie, but regardless, I think I don't know, the use of like a music industry as opposed to late night comedy scene. I think that just feels more like amenable to the situation that they're setting up here with the characters. I mean, the story-wise, they have a lot of similar beats. But I think this one feels more, I don't know, this is not necessarily authentic, because even if there is some kind of grounded realism in what it means for certain people to be of a certain age or a certain type and how to continue in the music industry, I do think it grapples with that in an interesting way, where I feel like my issue with Late Night was it has like the Emma Thompson stuff on one side where it feels serious, and then it has Mindy Kaling in like a weird sitcom that never really came together for me. This one feels consistent throughout, regardless of how effective that is at doing something unique. It feels like it's hitting what it wants to do, and I think that comes down to the writing, honestly. I'm not trying to slack on Late Night too hard. I know a lot of people like it, great for them. I think this is a more accomplished version of that kind of story.
I would have to agree. I'm glad we're having this conversation, because another thing that I will say about The High Note is that it's a very female-driven film. But unlike Late Night, where Late Night kind of shoves that agenda down your throat, like pretty much throughout the movie, this movie just kind of like shows you that. And it's in there without beating you over the head with it. And I really appreciated that element of the film. I really do like Mindy Kaling, but I do feel like upon watching Late Night again, because I saw it at Sundance, and when you're in Sundance, and I'm sure a lot of people can talk about this as well, when you see something at a film festival, there's like this initial reaction that you have because you're part of a crowd. And I often, when I watch them again, it's very rare that a movie will live up to that same level of hype or expectation that I had for it when I went into it the first time at a festival. And I remember watching Late Night again, and I was like, this movie does not hold up very well at all. It feels very like contrived, and like, I don't know, like the jokes, kind of like what you were saying, Aaron, like there's like the characters are in two different movies, and you're kind of like wondering like what is going on here. But High Note is very much like the same movie. All the characters seem to belong in this world, and they all like kind of elevate one another, where I feel like the other ones were kind of thrown in there with like some side of like, I don't know, hidden agenda or secondary message, where this one just kind of feels natural.
I think part of that comes from the fact that there's not any villain in The High Note. Like, there's not a character that purely exists to either, take down the other character or succeed themselves. Everyone's in it for presumably the right reasons, or at least reasons that make sense to them based off the industry they're in. Where want to keep doing like a critique of back and forth thing, but I mean, there are characters in the other movie that are designed specifically to be bumps in the plot or walls. And this one just feels more like it's about just people trying to do the right thing, in the way that makes sense to them, and growing as people. Like they're enemies to themselves, if anything. They're getting in their own way as far as how to like person.
Well, I think this picture was, far more intimate. It's only concerned with the micro journeys of its specific characters. Conversely, and again, different isn't wrong, blah blah blah. Late Night was more of a macro picture, and as you mentioned, they were trying to make a statement to a certain extent in a way that this film is just sort of live and let live with its characters.
Yeah.
I like both pictures, and what I like about both of them, which is why I kept being reminded of them, is that at no point is the female protagonist punished or judged for seeking power and getting power in a way that a lot of people compare to Late Night to The Devil Wears Prada. And one of the reasons I've never particularly enjoyed that movie is because whether the film intends to or not, there is a certain, judgment toward, the sacrifices and trade-offs and compromises that Anne Hathaway's character has to make in a way that frankly has always rubbed me the wrong way. I think in terms of consistency of tone, consistency of purpose, The High Note is a better picture. When I was talking about, theater versus whatever, that's more to scale. Late Night felt to me like a bigger film. There's a lot, there's it sort of plays a little bit, how are these characters and their actions affecting the outside world? But no, I think, if I'm forced to choose, I think The High Note is a better picture because it's more successful in its admittedly more limited goals.
Gotcha. I just want to ask one question, then we can move on from this. So when I was watching this, I was kind of thinking to myself that I would like to see this movie on the big screen, but I almost feel like this fate that this movie has now, where it's going on VOD, is probably better for the film. Does everyone kind of agree on that?
Commercially, yes. I mean, I think Universal, Comcast, Focus Features, I think they're, it's not an accident what they're choosing to release on VOD versus what they're holding for theaters. And that's not necessarily an artistic judgment, but, as you know, the quote unquote studio programmer, has fallen on hard times in the last 5 years, partially because, a lot fewer people go to the movies just to go to the movies anymore, because you have high quality at home presentation and you have streaming and VOD and DVD and prestige TV and what have you, for a huge portion of the populace, the main incentive to go to see a movie in theaters is, do I need to see this as soon as possible?
Right.
So yeah, I like the film, but I think it would have bombed in theaters.
Yeah.
It would have relatively gotten slaughtered by Black Widow's second weekend. Like, sure. I mean, we can't say for sure, and I do think the VOD will probably help it as far as the attention it'll get. But when you have like Tracy Ellis Ross and Ice Cube, people that like have social media followings, it'll help boost the profile of the movie. So I mean, it is what it is as far as the release it has.
Great. Aaron, you want to talk about your second pick?
Sure. Going back a few decades, I've been watching a lot of movies given the cold quarantine nature of things, and I was finally able to check out Tokyo Drifter from 1966, Seijun Suzuki's gangster jazz comedy. That's a fun way to put that movie. But I am in a little bit of disbelief that I've never seen this before, because it is so up my alley. Like, everything about this does everything that I kind of want in film, and like based off the movies that I like and my sensibilities. I can easily see where like the influences go to people like Tarantino or Jim Jarmusch or John Woo, or even things like Cowboy Bebop, which I just rewatched. There's so much style and effort put into this movie, where the story is pretty fun. It's about this Yakuza hitman who basically his boss wants to get out of the game and he wants to get out of it too. So the whole film revolves around him trying to leave the gangster life, and yet various enemies of their group continually go after them. And he's not necessarily looking for a fight. And so there's like constant interactions that result in gunfights and what have you. And he's not necessarily trying to be vicious about it, but sometimes he has to take things in his own hands. And it's very stylish. The way all of these like gunfights are handled, there's a lot of like quick editing, quick cuts and things that were just at that time pretty revolutionary. Like it was to a point where Suzuki as a director, he was doing so many like weird things with his movies that the studio did not like it and were like, stop doing this or we're going to fire you. And then his next movie, Branded to Kill, he continued to do it and they fired him. But it's still, it's right there with films like The Samurai at that time, where you have this like these movies that just kind of bleed cool. There's so much cool in this movie as far as the main character is concerned. He wears very colorful suits. He hums his own damn theme song throughout the movie. It's just like, it's really enjoyable. And I'm like, why did I wait so long to see this? Like, it's sitting on my shelf of Criterion. And I'm like, this is so like right for me. And it's a ton of fun. And it's only like 80 something, like it's not a long movie at all. Not that it's like necessarily a way to turn me off from a film, but at the same time, it's like, this is one that I could put on, was like immediately like, I look forward to watching this again, let alone seeing just all the references that you can catch from watching an older movie like this and seeing how it connects to so many filmmakers that I also like enjoy now. So I've been saying this is like the best movie I've seen since the whole lockdown thing going on, as far as new movies to me that just really hit me on all the right levels. So yeah, Tokyo Drifter, really, really cool movie. I think you can rent it on various VOD platforms. It's available on Criterion. I don't know if it's on the Criterion channel or not, because I don't have the Criterion channel. I just have physical releases, but still.
It's $4 rent on Amazon. I just checked.
There you go.
David, you want to chime in on this one? I guess not. He's from.
I suspect foul play.
I can hear you now, David.
Yeah. Did someone ask me a question?
Yeah. Have you seen the movie?
I have not seen. I've seen some Suzuki. I have not seen Tokyo Drifter.
And Scott, would you recommend this one too?
I haven't seen it, but I'm going to.
Haven't seen it either. Okay. All right.
Well, enough that I can probably watch some of it before my children bother me.
Well, there you go.
They'll love it. It's full of colors and dancing. And it's great.
Hey, if I thought they'd sit for it.
All right, Scott, go for your second pick.
I rewatched Inception for the first time in a decade, just on a whim. Yeah, pretty much. Obviously, Tenet just dropped its second trailer on Fortnite, which is both hilarious and actually kind of smart from a marketing perspective.
The dead speak.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's like when you said they were going to drop on the big screen, they were being literal. That was a big screen. But anyway, Inception. I liked it just fine when I saw it 10 years ago in theaters, and I still think it's pretty good. The minor nitpicky issues that I had with it back then are in play now. I think the first act is phenomenal. I have a lot of fun with the setup in terms of its, explaining how this all works and introducing all the characters and explaining how the big heist is going to go down. Because at the end of the day, the movie is a heist film in dreams, and that's part of what's clever about it, both from an artistic and from a commercial point of view. It's a very easy film to pitch, and it's an easier film in terms of a high concept to sell, which I think is part of why it did so well 10 years ago.
Your mind is the scene of the crime, Scott.
Exactly. It's a great tagline. It loses something for me when the action starts, then and now, just because so much of it is by default somewhat consequenceless action. I do, of the three big dream levels, I still like the second one best, when he's
is that Bowser's Castle?
What was that?
Is that Bowser's Castle?
No, I think that's the third one. That's the
okay.
Other night of the Secret Service beat that sort of like stuff's blowing up and it really barely matters. I get it. You want to make a Bond film. Get it out of your system, man. And he never did. But no, it's still a very strong picture. I still think it feels to me like a film where the action and the spectacle is meant to justify the budget rather than the reverse, where the budget is there to pay for the spectacle. And I hope that Tenet does not do that. and all this talk about, oh, it's as good as, it plays like Inception. It's, it's a secret sequel to its Inception. Please God, please don't let it be a secret sequel to Inception. For any number of reasons.
I feel like you're downplaying how much you actually like this movie, as if you want to not spoil it, like everyone hasn't seen it. Because you tend to talk that way, where like you want to hide the plot, so you have to see about the things that you didn't like. But I know you like this movie more than you're saying.
I
know David doesn't, but that's a different story.
I'll go positive for the next 30 seconds. The cast is wonderful. All the characters are well cast, and they all play the type. And while it's kind of funny that these heist people that aren't necessarily action heroes all become super hardcore, amazing action stars when they enter the dream world. Yeah, I go with that. It's fine. It's part of the fantasy.
Well, isn't that Matrix? Like that's
exactly.
I mean,
I was slightly more emotionally invested this time than I was 10 years ago. I don't know why. Just for whatever reason, the character arcs worked a bit better.
You have more kids.
I just bring them with me to France.
He's accused of murder. He can't just.
Well, I don't want to sound like cynicism or something, but it's like, take the kids to France. That's where you're hiding. That's where your father-in-law apparently teaches. Or no, that's not true. He's in anyway. Whatever. But no, it still holds up as high-quality, ambitious, very smart, and very polished popcorn entertainment, which was the kind of thing that even 10 years ago we started realizing wasn't something that we can necessarily take for granted.
Right. I agree. Just so we're on this real quick, since Tenet was like such a freaking conversation starter for like the last couple of months, I'm so tired of hearing about this movie. It's not even out yet. I'm literally so tired of hearing about it. Seriously, like everyone's like, is it coming? Is it coming? I'm like, I don't care anymore at this point. But I was just going to ask, since we're talking about Inception, Tenet, what's everyone, just real quick around the table here, what's everyone's favorite Christopher Nolan movie?
Dunkirk.
Really, David?
Prestige.
Yeah, Dunkirk.
Interesting. You
Memento.
said The Prestige. What'd you say?
Memento.
Yeah. Memento.
Like we're all different, apparently. What's yours, Scott? Insomnia?
No, it's not Insomnia.
Honestly, Insomnia is my second. Insomnia is great.
Yeah, I'm actually.
I like Insomnia.
I'm actually with Mendelson. I like The Prestige a lot.
The Prestige, even back in 2006, stuck out as A, I really liked it, but B, it also struck me as exactly the kind of film that he would never be able to make if he wasn't coming off of Batman Begins.
Right.
I mean, as big and splashy as Tenet seems to be, as Inception was, they're still, big budget action adventure movies with cool dudes and cool suits shooting guns and blowing stuff up.
It's my favorite Disney magician film.
Yes, exactly.
Take that, Presto, and Sorcerer's Apprentice.
And how about that Edward Norton movie that came out around that time too? The Illusionist.
The Illusionist. I like one Illusionist, and it's the French animated film from Sylvain Chomet. That's the Illusionist I like.
One thing that's always amused me about the Prestige is that, in my mind, it had one of the most misleading trailers I've ever seen for a major studio release. I don't know if anyone remembers the trailer, but the way the trailer plays, it's like Hugh Jackman is this virtuous good guy magician, while Christian Bale is this dark, sinister magician who can actually do real magic. And
I mean, he does, to his credit, he does have a goatee. So
yes, exactly. And of course, when you see the film, that's nothing how it plays out. If anything, Hugh Jackman's almost the bad guy to a certain extent.
Yes, no, he's the bad guy. No,
that's how but yes, it of his many movies that are kind of sort of about movie making or whatever, Inception certainly fits the bill in that sense. And I think to a certain extent, Tenet seems to be going in that direction. I mean, to the extent that Robert Pattinson looks like super sexy Chris Nolan.
Oh my God! Yeah, it does.
I'm almost wondering how self-satirical the film's going to be.
Yeah, that was a little weird. I saw that. Someone freeze framed that image of him. Like,
that was me.
Was that you?
Yeah.
Oh my god, yeah, that was great.
I'm not the only person that's noticed that. It's you could argue that DiCaprio kind of sort of looks like Nolan, Inception.
You don't need to argue. It's right there on screen. They're wearing stars. Like what?
Yeah, I mean but no, for me, yeah, The Prestige is my favorite Nolan picture.
Awesome.
Yeah, Memento's always been my tops. I mean, like Dark Knight's like right there. Like I'm a huge fan of the Dark, but Memento is such a unique motion picture as far as what it's doing, how it's doing it, and it makes it fun to watch. It doesn't feel like a chore to watch a movie that's told in reverse and forward at the same time using different color schemes and what have you to tell a very twisty labyrinthine plot. And that's because it applies the neo-noir format so effectively, where you have a story that knows that it can laugh at itself a little bit because of how ridiculous the premise is to begin with, yet be a huge tragedy as far as what the character's going through. And Joe Pants goes a long way. So, I mean, everything about that movie.
Once again, right from the start, disproving the myth that Christopher Nolan movies are not funny. Because they're all pretty funny. I mean,
like Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman's tight ties in Batman films are great.
I mean, if you can, yeah. When you just see them in the same scene, I started giggling. Like, oh, this is going to be fun. And I love the bit in Memento. The big laugh is, am I chasing him or is he chasing me? Bit. But yeah, that's those three. I think if I had to pick three favorite Nolan films, Dark Knight, Prestige, and Memento.
And I think it's fascinating that David Bax picked Dunkirk. I don't know why, because
it rules. That's why.
Yeah, Dunkirk. Well, here's the thing. I'm going to be the voice of mostly a Chris Nolan hater over here. I don't think most of his movies are very funny, and I think my least favorite part of any Christopher Nolan movie is when two characters just talk to each other, which is why I find Inception so stultifying, because it's just constantly serious, like talking about what and explaining the movie to you, and I think about like the worst scene in The Dark Knight is Heath Ledger and Aaron Eckhart in the hospital together. It's just like, it's so stupid and speechy. And I like Dunkirk because it's the one movie where he gets the hell out of his way and just does some pure filmmaking that he's really, really good at. There's not a whole lot of super talky scenes in Dunkirk, and I really respect Dunkirk because I think it's a better frame for what Christopher Nolan is actually good at, which is to be I think what's what I'm looking for? I'm trying to find a word that's not visionary because it's such an overused word. But I think he actually has a cinematic vision, and sometimes he feels like he needs to adorn it with sort of like weighty stuff that tends to, I think, drag down a lot of his movies for me. And Dunkirk ends up being more having more heft emotionally to me. For all of the speechifying that it cuts out.
That's you say Insomnia was like your second favorite, and that's just like an ASMR video between two of the biggest actors.
I will say, as someone that was a little grouchier than I wanted to be about Interstellar and Dark Knight Rises, I really enjoyed the hell out of Dunkirk.
I'm sorry, like I love the visual of that movie, and I love the sound design. I did not care at all about any of the characters or anything going on in the movie.
You didn't care about young Timothy Chalamet? Are we talking about Interstellar? Or are we talking about
both movies? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, Dunkirk, just like it visually, I remember seeing it because like that was when they showed it to us on IMAX, right? Scott Menzel. That was in the one in Universal. And they went all out for that. I remember that. And I remember the sound and everything being so grand. But then I just was like, I walked out of that movie and I was just like, I didn't feel anything about any of the characters. It was just strange for me because to like David's point though, like I understand what he's talking about, like with Nolan movies, like there's always like they're so serious, like at times like the characters are talking and you're like, this is going to be like life or death scenario, like no matter what it is, it's always like so heavy and it's like, okay, it's not really that serious. Calm down.
I do think you're speaking to a different kind of movie with Dunkirk though, like it's not that it's not that it's wrong or right to have characters you definitely feel for, but like David said, there is a heft to just the situation. There's a child, and I think that it applies more to the thriller sense of there's a whole movement of people that need to survive this thing, as opposed to we definitely need to care about, Guy and other Guy and Harry Styles. I do think it's effective in drawing out a situation that really matters as far as these people are here, they need to get here, and everything is trying to stop them. And on that level, the way he's telling that story by using 3 different storylines and tying them together in this kind of spiral, I found it to be very effective. In addition to the fact that, yes, you have a ton of grandeur as far as the visuals go and the action sequences and Tom Hardy wearing another mask, like all of those things I think really add to like why that movie is so effective.
I never cared who he was until he put on the mask.
He was born in the darkness, if you didn't know that.
Yes. I do agree with you, David, about in terms of Inception. That was one where a lot of the dialogue scenes, especially after the dream starts, it feels like every 5 minutes DiCaprio is turning to Ellen Page or somebody else and springing a new rule on them.
Yeah.
He's a real Bill Maher of the world.
And with the caveat that not every movie is made to be seen 1,000 times. If I'd only seen it once in theaters, fine, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, I appreciate Nolan as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, but he doesn't make movies that I want to revisit often. Like, I can watch his work and I can appreciate what he's done and his achievements that he's made with every new film. But to me, like, there's not something where I'm like, oh, well, a year went by, let me pop this bad boy on again. I just don't feel that way. But Aaron, you do, right?
It's funny because I actually don't rewatch a lot of his movies because I'm so enamored with the IMAX formatting that he uses for them. So like the ones I rewatch are Memento. Like I've seen Memento I've seen Dark Knight probably the most, honestly, but at this point. But Memento, I can easily put that on because it fits on my small screen more. Where if I put on the Batman trilogy or the Dark Knight trilogy, I don't want to. Get it right. It's like it's nice to like I have a big TV that I can watch this Blu-ray on, but at the same time it's like I saw that in IMAX theater and it really feels like an event film because of that. And so it's not for lack of trying, it's just more of I really like watching it in this format. So it's hard for me to be like, let me watch Interstellar on my on merely something around 50 inches as opposed to a giant IMAX screen. But that doesn't mean I don't like. I love the movies. Like they do their job.
Awesome.
Interstellar is the reason I bring my hearing aids to press screenings now.
Is that true? No.
Oh yeah.
No.
Do you want the whole
You
story?
want to go quietly into the night?
Oh, I do want the whole story. Now that you said that, do we have time? How long is the story?
Tell me. Oh no, it's a couple minutes.
Okay, go for it. I want to hear it.
I went to the very first big splashy screening. Very excited. Got there a little late because of traffic, so I had to sit in a not great place. And the entire time I'm watching the movie, I wasn't enjoying it as much as I expected, whatever. But I also was having a terrible time hearing the dialogue. And the entire time thinking, oh my God, am I sitting in a place where because where I'm sitting, I can't hear a lot of the key dialogue? And am I going to like write a negative review, which, it was before the embargo. It's not like I can ask anybody else. It's going to turn out that the only reason I didn't like it is because I couldn't hear half the dialogue. So I wrote, it's not my best review, if you ever want to look it up. And then, of course, 2 days before the movie comes out in theaters, the audio is screwed up. Nobody can hear it in theaters, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I really wish somebody had told me this. Because I frankly, I agonized over what to do about it. Because I didn't want to be the only jerk that panned Interstellar. And then it turned out because I just couldn't hear the darn film. It turned out nobody could hear the film. So as soon as it opened, I think it was like the Monday or whatever after opening weekend, I went to my local multiplex, sat dead center in the middle of the screen with my hearing aids. Like, okay, it's still the same movie. There's stuff that I did miss the first time, absolutely, but it's still the same movie.
Yeah, well, to my point earlier about not liking the dialogue in Christopher Nolan's movies, not being able to hear it in Interstellar didn't make the movie any better or worse to me.
And when he does that, and he doesn't always do that, obviously, my frustration comes that if the characters can hear if the characters can hear that dialogue, I should be able to hear that dialogue.
Yes, I agree. All right.
Now,
Well, that was a fun, like, little recap on Christopher Nolan movies. Why we love them, why we hate them. There we go. So real quick, just to go around the room one more time, starting with Aaron, where everyone can find you, and final words.
Again, you can find me writing movie reviews at WeLiveEntertainment.com. I also write Blu-ray reviews over at WhySoBlue.com. I'm on Twitter, Aaron's PS4. I host a podcast called Out Now with Aaron and Abe. That's now a bi-weekly show. That's on iTunes, everywhere you can find podcasts. And yeah, I think the trip to Greece is a lot of fun for the final course of the trip series. And Tokyo Drifter was a really cool older Japanese film that I was quite big on. So yeah, and Memento was still my favorite Nolan film, I guess. Is that what we're doing?
There you go. No, that's perfect. All right, Mendelson, there you go. What do you got there? We got your kid.
Okay, now I can mute. Forbes.com. Google Scott Mendelson, Forbes in the ticket booth. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
David Bax.
Again, you can find me at battleshippretension.com. And despite the fact that I hadn't seen anything that anyone else was talking about today, I've actually watched a bunch of movies lately and have reviewed a bunch of stuff, including The Vast of Night, that you can find at battleshippretension.com. That's also where you can find my my podcast, also called Battleship Pretension, which is also bi-weekly, I think, or is it semi-weekly? I can't remember, but it's twice a week. That's at battleshippretension.com. Everything is, and you can follow me on Twitter at DavyPretension.
All right, and yes, I will go to bat for both these men right here, Aaron and David. You should listen to their podcasts because they are very good, very informative, and they're for film lovers. David and I have this constant back and forth where, like, I always tell him he doesn't like anything, but it's always interesting to see what David does like, which is why I love listening to his podcast, and also I'm always intrigued when I read his reviews. And Aaron is just so dedicated. I mean, I've never got to say this publicly, but Aaron has just been amazing for We Live Entertainment. I'm so incredibly lucky to have him, and his love and passion for this is just contagious. So thank you, Aaron.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And Mendelson with his muted mic and his adorable kid. Thank you, everyone, for being on this show today. And
you're very welcome. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and I'll talk to you guys later on. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Okie doke.
Bye.